to welcome up our three speakers. We have not only one, not two, but three members of the Texas Supreme Court. So if you'll welcome up to the stage, Texas Supreme Court Justices Eva Guzman, Justice John Devine, and Justice Jimmy Black. So I have a few things to say about them. So Justice Eva Guzman has been on the Supreme Court since 2009, making history as the first Latina to sit on the state's highest civil court. The next year, the people of Texas elected her to a full term, and she then, at that point, became the first Hispanic woman elected to statewide office in Texas. She was previously on the 14th Court of Appeals, the appellate court in one of the appellate courts in the city of Houston, where she worked on thousands of cases, and also as a judge at the 309th District Court in Harris County. Before taking the bench, she had a 10-year legal career. Before that, she got her undergrad degree from the University of Houston, so my fellow Cougs out there, and her law degree from the South Texas College of Law, and an LLM at Duke University School of Law. She's been married over 25 years. Her and her husband are proud parents to one daughter who recently graduated from Harvard University. We also have with us, as I mentioned, Justice Jimmy Blacklock, who is the newest member of the Texas Supreme Court. Tell you a little bit about Justice Blacklock. About Justice Blacklock. Is that better? I'm going back to my elevator voice. Y'all know I can talk, okay, if you've been around me. So I had to turn the volume down a little bit. So in January 2018, Governor Greg Abbott appointed Justice Blacklock to the Texas Supreme Court. Before that, he was very close to the governor. He served as the general counsel for Governor Abbott and also worked under Governor Abbott in the Attorney General's office, handling numerous cases at the trial level, constitutional cases, state and federal court. And before that, he was appointed by George W. Bush to the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. He worked in private practice in Houston, clerk for Judge Jerry Smith on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. A proud graduate from my other alma mater, University of Texas at Austin. I know we got some Longhorns in the crowd here. And in Yale Law School, just like Brett Kavanaugh, who's in hearings this week for the Supreme Court. He was born in Houston, lives now in Austin with his wife and 3 children. And let me tell you a little bit about Judge Devine, okay? So Justice Devine was elected to the Supreme Court in 2012. He previously served for 7 years as a state district court judge. He's a native of Indiana. That's Devine. No, I just know him as a real Lone Star Texas warrior. He attended Ball State University, graduated in 1980 with a BS degree in business administration, and then he worked for Shell Oil, and then had an opportunity to pursue his law degree in 1986. After that successful career, which he's done, and then married in 1988 his lovely wife, Nubia Gomez, who's formerly of Venezuela. They have 6 children. Oh, so the bio's not updated. We got to talk to whoever the court administrator is. And so he was elected in 2012, and his term expires at the end of 2018, but I think he might have something to do with that. Okay, so let's get into some issues here regarding the court. I've got some questions to ask. See, usually it's the judges that ask the questions when lawyers appear in court. It's my turn. So we'll start with ladies first. Justice Guzman, tell our audience, there's some lawyers in the audience, but a lot of times there are not. What is the main function of the Texas Supreme Court, and do you hear all types of cases?
First of all, thank you so much for inviting us to join you today. Honored to be here and to see so many friends and to have the opportunity to connect with the people we serve. The Texas Supreme Court is a civil court. Texas is unique in that we have 2 high courts, one for civil matters and one for criminal matters. The one for criminal matters is the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. Anyone know the only other state that has the same system?
Just raise your hand.
Yes.
Nobody. Well, you're going to know in just a minute.
Oklahoma.
Oh.
So there are 2 states with the high courts. There are 9 of us that sit on the court. We are elected to the court. We serve 6-year terms, and the other unique thing about our court, I've served on a trial court and then in the middle on an intermediate appellate court. So I had to decide every case that came before those courts. On the Texas Supreme Court, it's known as a court of discretionary review. And that means we choose our documents. We get about 1,000 to 1,200 requests a year. They're known as petitions. And it's lawyers that have a complaint about what happened in the courts below. They present their complaints in writing. And we, the 9 of us, get together and decide what we're going to hear, what we're going to consider. The main thing that we look for is issues that are important to the jurisprudence of the state. And that means issues that are important to Texans all over the state. We meet in conference, we talk, we debate, we dialogue, we're still really good friends. But we have very serious conversations about really important issues. So we usually grant or hear about 10% of those cases. And when I was on the intermediate court, I always thought, what does that Supreme Court do? They just don't hear as many cases. But actually, these are the most complex cases in the state. The issues run the gamut from, $1 billion contract to a property law dispute, anything that's civil in nature. And it's truly been a great privilege to have an impact. We don't make laws. It's not our job, not our role. But we do have an impact on how the state's jurisprudence takes form. And that's because we interpret the statutes. So your legislatures pass those statutes, and it's up to us to interpret them and apply them to the facts.
Well, and I might add that that's not the extent of our responsibilities. We also administer the state bar, which is 100,000 lawyers. And that's sort of like a nightmare and akin to herding cats and so forth. We also handle mandamuses, emergency matters that come to us on a daily basis. Every week we have the joy of voting on rain, sleet, or snow, 20 to 40 cases that come in regularly every week that have to have a vote. Those cases that have been the ones that are accepted or considered to, at a later date, we put them on a conveyor belt, if you will, and we get to those again later in conference. We also have a number of state official business that we have to be. We are the third branch of government, and with that comes state responsibilities. And that's all on top of our staff, managing our staff, and so forth. So we have our hands full.
Well, there's a lot of important work that happens at the Texas Supreme Court, so we're going at the seniority level, but I do have a question specifically for you, Justice Devine. You touched on some of that, so we'll stay with you here before we go to Justice Jimmy Blacklock. So one of the things we see a lot, and you see on television or whatever, is the where lawyers appear in court and that part of the function of the court. So how often does the Texas Supreme Court hear those oral arguments where you see those things play out, at least particularly at the appellate court level as well? How often do you have those oral arguments, and can the public attend to watch these cases and these questions and debate go back and forth, if you will, or the exchange go back and forth with the lawyers and the court?
Yes, they are, the public is welcome. They are videotaped. I think they're archived by St. Mary's University, is that right? I know that changed recently. State Bar now, was St. Mary's, but State Bar has those on archive. We will hear oral arguments 20 times a year, 20 weeks a year, and 9 cases every week. Somewhere around 100, whatever it takes, and it differs. Sometimes we'll have less, sometimes we'll have more, sometimes cases settle, it fluctuates. And then after every oral argument, then we follow up with a conference to discuss those cases. that we heard. Now, interestingly enough, when we have oral arguments, one of us has been assigned that case. No one else knows who has the case except our colleagues, but one of us who will be listening that day will be responsible for writing the opinion in that case. And so we'll go back, we'll write a memo to our colleagues and sort of give them a feel for how we're leaning on the case, what we think the issues are, what we think the law is as it applies, and where we would like to go with the case. And then we have an open discussion amongst all of us, all 9 of us, and we debate, you know, and then the author, whoever drew the opinion, will then get a feel for whether or not he's going to be writing a majority opinion or a dissent or a concurrence, and that differs sometimes. But usually, you know, I think 60% of our cases are majority opinions. Our rate of majority and dissents and so forth is about the same as the United States Supreme Court. And we all know how they're sort of politically divided. And we're all Republicans, and yet we all differ. And the way we split hairs with concurrences and dissents and so forth. And so out of the 100 cases, if you will, we might have 120 actual opinions, which would include dissents and concurrences. And then we also have another derivation of that, which we call PCs, which are procuring opinions, which are not full-blown opinions, but they're opinions from the court, they're brief opinions from the court that we will release to the public. And it's, I can't really say it's error correction, but it sort of is. And we're, without going into a lot of detail, we're sort of fixing something from a lower court, appellate court usually, and correcting the record.
Well, and a lot of times people don't realize that. So the Supreme Court room, the building where the oral arguments take place, where you'll see this play out, this exchange with the lawyers and the judges, is right next to the Texas Capitol. So, you know, we're here in the Austin area. That's something that you're interested in that, you could look into that. It's actually the northwest corner, if you will, of the Capitol, where there's a building there, and that's where there's an appellate court, a lower appellate court there, but that's where the Texas Supreme Court hears these cases. Sometimes they'll travel around the state and have the oral arguments in different parts of the state to get to know people or whatever their reasons are, just to get out of the building. But the primary role is to have, or where there usually are, is in that one building that's right by the state capitol. So it might be something that you're interested in. You can learn more about the process and have a more appreciation for the role that they're in, but also the work that lawyers are doing on these cases.
And let me add that, in fact, next week we will be in Odessa at UT Permian Basin, conducting oral arguments out there. And we will travel from law school to law school, wherever we're invited. And usually we go twice. One year I think we did 3 times, but usually it's twice a year. And we will travel abroad, take the Supreme Court roadshow to the community and the rest of the state so that they can see too. And we always get a fabulous turnout and a great deal of interest. Usually it's done at a university or a law school.
Well, Justice Blacklock has been very patient, so we have some questions for him too. So Justice Blacklock, I wanted to ask you about the proper role of the courts as it relates to the legislative branch. And I want to throw in, just as a reminder, you heard Justice Blacklock's bio, that he was the general counsel for Governor Abbott. So he was in that place where there was, and before when he was Attorney General, but during the time that Governor Abbott was in that position. So you've had some interaction, if you will, with the legislative process. So just to repeat, what's the proper role of the courts as it relates to the legislative process, and how is your role with Governor Abbott at the governor's office allowed you some insight now on the bench?
Well, our role, our only role as judges, is to apply the law, apply the Constitution the way that they're written. Apply the words that are written down in the Constitution, written down in the laws. And the reason that that's so important is because the Supreme Court belongs to the people of Texas. It doesn't belong to the judges or the lawyers. It belongs to the people who created this state when they ratified the Constitution and then who elect representatives to make laws. And so the Constitution that we've all consented to be governed by and the laws that are made through the legislative process laid out in the Constitution, those are the laws that we as judges are bound by. And it doesn't matter whether we like them or we think they could be improved or we think we have some disagreement with where they take us. Those disagreements are for the people through their elected representatives to sort out. And so our job is to look at the law, look at the words that were chosen by the legislature and by the people in their constitution, and apply the language of the law to the cases that come before us. Anything less than that would be an abdication of our duty, and anything more than that could become a situation where the judges are the ones running the show instead of the people.
Well, and let me take back up then the next question. I'll start with you, Justice Blacklock. We'll come back down in seniority order. What do you think, and I know you worked on some constitutional law cases before with your time in Attorney General's office. What do you think about the importance of court cases that involve constitutional law?
Well, those are some of the most important cases that we decide. The Constitution is the document that creates the state, that sets all the guidelines for how the government operates. It's the rule book, it's the instruction manual for all of us in government. And so a case that implicates constitutional provisions or constitutional rights is of the utmost importance. And we don't get as many of those cases as you might think on the Texas Supreme Court. A big chunk of what we do are contract cases where people dispute whether they have a contract or how much is owed under a contract. Tort cases where someone claims to have been injured and sues on that basis. And these typically don't involve too many constitutional issues. But occasionally we do get cases that implicate the state constitution or the U.S. Constitution. And we take all our cases very, very seriously, but those cases are of course, of the utmost importance.
All right, we'll move back in seniority level to Justice Devine. What is your view? Oh, yes, all three can address the question, absolutely. Justice Guzman.
I will just add to
Yes.
that it's really not the role of courts, 9 judges in our case, to modernize the Constitution or to modernize statutes. I say that because it's important. That cuts both ways. People on both sides of issues would like us to fix it, to modernize it. And it's just really important, no matter what side of the issue you're on, to remember that 9 judges should not be doing that. It should be you. That power lies with the people. And so I just want to leave that thought with you on that issue.
Well, and also, no judge should do that. The Constitution means what it says and says what it means. And it's, it's actually my favorite area. I counted over the last 5 or 6 years, we've had about 7 really meaty constitutional cases that have come up. The trend is we're seeing a lot more free speech cases, with the social media and so forth, and, what people can say and can't say. And newspaper cases where newspapers are sued for libel and various other things. And so we're seeing a lot of that. But it's a fascinating area. It's one that never grows old. And one that I think this court, for the last 6 years, has been very active. At any other point in time in the past, this court has been very interested in those issues.
Well, and this next question too for all three. So, Texas may be different than some other states. It's different than the way it is in the federal government. As far as the federal bench, is that our judges are elected. So at the federal level, we see this nomination process being played out right now in Washington, D.C. So I want to ask all three of y'all what you think about the value, if you will, the process of voters electing judges in Texas.
So I've been on the ballot a number of times. I was first appointed to the district court by then Governor Bush. That was a long, long time ago. Governor Perry had the great honor to be appointed by Governor Perry to the appeals court and the Supreme Court. Each of those times, even though I was first appointed, I had to stand for election. I am known as a strong campaigner, mostly because I enjoy talking, to the people that we serve. I have been all over the state. I've met people all over the state. The downside to judicial campaigns is that they have to be funded some way. And generally speaking, the people that fund judicial campaigns are the lawyers. I remember being in Navasota, and it was my first countywide campaign, and it was back in 2001. And I walked up to a gentleman who was about 70 years old, who was wearing overalls, and I tried to hand him a brochure, and he was so grumpy. And I just felt so bad. But then I went back and I gave my speech, and I said, listen, this is the kind of judge I will be. So when I was done, he came back up to me, and he handed me a $15 check. And it could, that for me, would have been a $1,500 check. Because what it said to me is people want to hear the message. They want to know what kind of judge you'll be. They want to know their candidates. So then he was asking me for brochures to take home to pass out to all this kind of stuff. So the process works in that way. When people get to know us, they will understand whether we have the judicial philosophy that they want. The downside is, how the elections are funded, and whether that causes people to believe that, there's some sort of distrust about that process. I can tell you for all those years, on every court I've ever worked, I've never seen one instance where a judge says, well, so-and-so gave me this much money, and so I'm going to rule this way. I have not even thought that they were thinking that, okay? And so, that's just one of the things that people bring up. What's the other thing that's sort of problematic about judicial races? How many times have you voted for a judge that you don't know? You've seen their name on the ballot. That's the other problem. Take the time to go to the judge's website to find out who the judge is, who the judge runs around with, what the judge stands for. Because that cuts both ways. You get folks voted into office that are probably not the best choice. And then you get some people that should have been reelected, not reelected. So think about those things. Ultimately, how we select judges is up to you, the people of Texas.
Yeah, well, it's probably not the best time to ask Jimmy and I, because we are one. And so, speaking for myself, I've been to 2 or 3 cities in the last 24 hours, and we've still got to go tonight till 10 o'clock. So it's a long day. And
I'm not running.
she's not running. But, ladies and gentlemen, she's always running. And, she is a vicious campaigner. But she's wonderful, and she makes us all look good. So it's fine. It's an honor to be here with her. But, there's an honest debate. Texas is one of the few states around the country that elects its judges. I'm perfectly content with that. I too like campaigning. Once you get the engine going, and I'm 60 this year, and so the older you get, the harder it becomes to get into that grind and then still maintain our job. We still have business to do, and we're getting back into our cycle now, and so between now and November, the next 60 days, it's just going to be murder, because we've got to be in Dallas in 2 or 3 different places in one day, and also we've got votes to get out, and we've got conference to do, and we've got oral arguments to attend, which are all must items and requirements that we do. And so it's for a season for us, and Jimmy's young. He's young enough to be my son. It's probably easier for him than it is for me, but it's a season, and we'll get over it, we'll get through it, and we'll get on to the next one. But there's a debate internally with members of the House in different bodies that, is that such a great idea? I'm one for keeping it that way. Again, like Eva, it's your decision. It's in the Constitution, and you guys, that's what you want, and that's what you'll get. And I think it's good because we get to go out and explain ourselves to you and hold ourselves out to you and be accountable to you every 6 years.
Well, I agree with what's been said, and one of the positives about judicial campaigns that you might not think too much about is that we have conversations like the one we're having right now about the role of judges. And we go all around the state and we have similar talks with all kinds of different groups of people about what the court does, why we do it, what's the basis in the Constitution for what we should be doing and what we shouldn't be doing. And those are essential conversations that we need to have as a people, as Texans and as Americans. We need to understand our courts, and we need to understand what their proper role is and what their proper role is not. Federal judges are appointed for life, and there's a lot of value to that, but you don't see them too often making that circuit and talking to people about what they do and why they do it. So campaigning, for all of its warts, it does require us to get out and talk to the people we serve about what we do. And hopefully more people understand the judicial process and the judicial role, because we're out there talking about it.
Yeah, it's very important. Okay, so we haven't talked about any court cases specifically yet, for good reason. The judges don't comment on court cases before them, and so we're not going to be talking about any court cases they've recently decided either. But there is one court case I want to ask about at the U.S. Supreme Court level, and if you feel comfortable responding, I'll have the opportunity for all three judges. Recently, there was a major court case before the U.S. Supreme Court on religious liberty where a Christian cake baker, Jack Phillips, and one of the lawyers for Jack Phillips is going to be a part of a panel later today. You don't want to miss that, Kelly Fedor. But so Colorado cake baker Jack Phillips, his case went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court simply to be in a position to prevent the government, to stop the government from punishing him because of his religious beliefs, so the government wouldn't force him to have to use his creative talents to create a cake with a message that goes against his religious beliefs. That case, Jack Phillips won 7-2 at the U.S. Supreme Court. So, Judge Devine, I'll just start with you since you're next to me. If you have any thoughts on the outcome of that case?
Well, we've had similar cases in Texas, but yeah, I mean, in that case, this gentleman who had the business, the bakery business, had deeply held religious convictions and beliefs, and those are protected. And I look at that case along the lines of Hobby Lobby, which covered Obamacare and forcing the folks at Hobby Lobby who were devout Christians to pay for abortion services for their employees and insurance and so forth. And they won that case. And then the Little Sisters of Poor, and so the same kind of issue there. And so, yeah, I like those outcomes.
Justice Guzman.
So there are some questions that have not been answered, but in my view, what the case did do was reaffirm a fundamental principle of our democracy, and that's that the government cannot discriminate against religious liberty. And so while there are questions that remain to be answered, and I know that many of you follow that closely, it is tremendously important that the court spoke in this manner about government being hostile toward religious belief, and then we'll see where the next case takes us.
Well, it's interesting that when you look back at the Obergefell decision, Justice Kennedy's decision about same-sex marriage, one of the things he said is that in the future there are going to be conflicts between people of faith and this right that the Supreme Court was announcing in that decision. And he said it was something that didn't get a lot of attention, but the Obergefell opinion actually talks about how the perspective that people of faith have on the issue is a legitimate part of the public debate and is protected by the First Amendment. And so the court foresaw cases like the cake shop case, and then when that case came about, you saw that the First Amendment rights of the people who didn't want to go along with same-sex marriage were respected by the court, despite the courts having previously recognized the right to same-sex marriage. And so there's a balance there that the court talked about to begin with, and then actually did follow through on in this decision.
Well, we won't have a discussion about this case, but I will make a comment, a different case I want to mention, a comment. Texas Values is involved in a case that did go up to the Texas Supreme Court, and and also found its way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, where we're part of a legal team that is going up against the city of Houston. The city of Houston has a policy where they have been using tax dollars to subsidize and fund same-sex benefits, which it goes against state law and also goes against local law in the city of Houston. While the U.S. Supreme Court ruled on the issue of marriage between one man and one woman, the U.S. Supreme Court has not specifically said that when it comes to using tax dollars for same-sex benefits, that that's something that a government is required to do. So a portion of this case, it's not over, but part of the case in the beginning came up to the Texas Supreme Court. And the city of Houston, I will tell you, has spent millions probably at this point of taxpayer dollars with some of the largest law firms going up against two taxpayers that we represent free of charge. And so they tried to get the Texas Supreme Court to agree with them to essentially say that the U.S. Supreme Court has said something that they have not said yet, and that's that governments are required to use their tax dollars to fund same-sex benefits. That went up to the Texas Supreme Court. The city of Houston lost there in their argument. They tried to appeal. They asked the U.S. Supreme Court to appeal, to take up the case. The U.S. Supreme Court said no there. We won there. And we've won 3 or 4 times at different stages in this case, but there's going to be a hearing later on this year back in Houston, back in trial court. So just another reason to see value of the work we do in the limited court cases that Texas values. So that is considered one of the most important cases moving forward on where the courts will be in this issue as we see different judges at the U.S. Supreme Court. So that leads me to my last question about the U.S. Supreme Court. The Senate Judiciary Committee, which has 2 members from our state, U.S. Senator John Cornyn, U.S. Senator Ted Cruz. We've seen a lot of this video. We've seen people trying to disrupt the process of Brett Kavanaugh seeking confirmation. So I want to ask each of you, if you want to answer individually, if you would ever consider being nominated to the U.S. Supreme Court. No, just Javon. Well, I think just like Brett, just like you would answer. That must be a pretty good question if I got to stop. I will say this about all 3 of y'all. Just like Brett Kavanaugh, all 3 of y'all are very well qualified and would be incredible additions to the U.S. Supreme Court. We're going to wrap up this session and this panel, and Judge Devine actually drove all the way from Houston. I know he's got another event tonight, but he rearranged the schedule to get here in time, and he made it in time. So thank you, Judge Devine. Justice Devine, I know you're working on a few things in your schedule. Justice Blacklock as well. Thank you all 3, not 1, 2, but 3 members of our Texas Supreme Court today.